Sam Austin, founder and board chair of IDAC, the Investment Diversity Advisory Council, and partner and chairman of the board at NEPC, one of the world's leading investment consulting firms. Welcome to the Epic Human Podcast.
Joe, thank you very much for having me today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This has been a long time coming, and I'm thrilled we can finally get it done. So you and I both serve on the board of IDAC.
Right.
And it's an organization you were a founder of. And just for those who don't know, and I'll just read this directly from our charter, IDAC is a forum for the nation's largest institutional investors to discuss academic, empirical, and business cases that support diverse decision-making, best practices to promote diversity in finance, and data-driven strategies to track progress over time. So my question for you is, there are a lot of other organizations that are focused on diversity in finance and other industries. What inspired you to start IDAC, and why must it exist?
That's a great question. It really goes to the core, I think, of who I am, Joe, and the core of who I think our country is. I'm really focused on this being an opportunity for all stakeholders in our industry to get together and understand that while we may have divergent agendas, we do have one thing in common, which is maximizing the talent in our organizations and maximizing the talent in the products that we deliver to our stakeholders. And IDAC is about getting us to realize in our industry what America was supposedly founded on, which is that all are welcome here, and that if talent is evenly distributed throughout the population, we want to utilize all of that talent to give the best possible result for our clients. So why does it exist? For talent maximization. Why is it different? We believe it's the only opportunity within our institutional asset management business where all stakeholders are sitting around the table together, talking about the things that are in our common interest.
So according to the Knight Foundation, just to follow up on that, to the Knight Foundation, as of last year, 1.4% of the total US AUM is managed by diverse and or female managers. So vast majority, 98% is managed by white males. And those are just the statistics, and they may surprise a lot of people. I know I was surprised when I first read that. And I've dealt with this issue myself as in the venture capital industry, worked in it for 10 years.
Right.
Very few other investors, Black, brown, female, around me at firms I was working at. And that's really what inspired me to get involved with organizations like Black VC and Cap Table Coalition and now IDAC. Right. So my question for you is, what are IDAC's goals, and how do we really move the needle with this great challenge?
Well, Joe, I'm a big believer in metrics and having goals. So one of the first things we did was have a very healthy debate for about a year on what these goals should be. And one of them is to double the participation of people from underutilized groups. You mentioned women. You mentioned historically classified minorities in the United States. But we think this is a global issue, and in large part, this would be true about from a gender equity perspective anywhere in the world. That we want to double the participation of businesses owned by those underrepresented groups over the next half decade. Secondly, in order to achieve this kind of equitable participation in our business, in our particular industry, we have a goal of bringing 10,000 new professionals into our industry, which really means reaching down to like the 7th grade level, Joe, to make students aware of financial literacy skills that will help them throughout their lives, whether they become a part of our industry or not, but also introducing them to a career path in what could be an extremely rewarding career in financial services. So that's narrowly what the goals are for IDAC, and it's very specific. It's time-bound. It's measurable to see are we accomplishing it or not. You mentioned the term moving the needle. We'll talk a little later about the IDAC Global Summit on DEI in September. But the theme of that conference is moving the needle. So we want to do things that are actionable, that show us moving toward those goals. But if I might, I'd love to just talk a little more broadly that the bigger vision, 10 years out, is that IDAC can be an example to other industries of how we can decide on different stakeholders with different agendas getting together and finding out where's the intersection of those agendas, working towards putting the best possible team to play. So we're hopeful that if the private sector can do that, we're starting in our industry, in institutional asset management, but if other industries can do that, and then partner with the powerful things that government can do to incent those things, to measure those things, we can build public-private partnerships that neither the government alone could do by themselves, nor could any one company, any one individual, even any one industry could do on our own. So there's a broader vision as well.
Wow. You've mentioned twice now the value of having multiple cohorts involved. And so the 5 cohorts that are involved in the IDAC platform are allocators, consultants, diverse owned managers, non-diverse owned managers, and industry partners. Why is it important that all 5 are represented? And what does each group bring to the table, in your opinion?
That's a great question. Do we have more than an hour on this? Each of those groups plays an important role in our industry. And again, other industries are going to be different. They'll have different sets of cohorts. But in our industry, allocators, the first group you mentioned, those are pension funds, they're endowments and foundations, they're corporate entities, hospitals, private wealth family offices. These are all sources of great capital that are seeking a place to put that money to use and earn a return on that money. Then there are the asset managers, whether they be diverse owned or not diverse owned, who are the companies that are generally hired to produce that return for those allocators. There are investment consultants, such as my firm, NEPC, that sit in the middle between the allocators and the managers to help determine the appropriate strategic asset allocation, to do due diligence on the right managers that would fit for those particular allocators. So you can begin to see right away that there are different agendas that each of those 3 groups would have. We subdivide the managers into diverse and non-diverse, and then we also have industry partners. We'll talk about them in a moment. But those 3, if we'll start with them, they can be seen as on opposite sides of the fence, and consultants as the gatekeepers that's managing that fence, or the gate in the fence. So what we've done is to indicate that each party has something to gain, and each party should have something they're willing to give in order to get a better result. All of those parties are joined together in wanting the best possible risk-adjusted return for their stakeholders. And to get the best possible risk-adjusted return, I would posit that having the best investment talent, the best marketing representatives, the best senior management, the best board governance of those organizations will lead to getting better results for the stakeholders from an investment perspective. So this is very much both an altruistic thing, but it's also in the best business interest of all of those all of those stakeholders to find the best way they can put their foot forward. If I might digress for just a moment,
sure.
I will go into some rather predictable sports analogies here. That if you were a Major League Baseball owner back in the 1940s and thought, why would I want to shake up the boat by recruiting this Jackie Robinson character from the Negro Leagues? We're doing just fine as we are. So if you were a middling Major League Baseball owner who'd never won the World Series and thought, I don't need to look at somebody that is new to the business or new to our industry, you would have missed out on one of the greatest talents of that generation or any other. If you were don't want to pick on this particular school. If let's say you were a school somewhere in the South, perhaps playing in the big leagues of college football, but there's some kid down the road named Jerry Rice. Why should I bother recruiting him? You've never won a national championship. maybe you're not looking at that the right way, because if you're managing your business well, as the Brooklyn Dodgers did, and saying we want to put the best talent in the field, after they did so, how about that? They won a World Series after they had 2 or 3 African Americans on their team. If you were Bear Bryant back in the 1960s and realized, wow, USC came to my hometown and whipped us because they had an integrated team and we did not, I'm going to lead the way for the SEC to begin recruiting players from a different background. Okay, those are stories we all know, but I'm trying to bring it into focus that if 70% plus of our population in the United States, I would say it's arguably similar, at least on a gender equity basis, at least 50% plus in countries all around the world. If 50 to 70% of the population is overlooked, underrepresented, drastically underrepresented in a particular industry, and you have the critical assumption that talent should be evenly distributed throughout the population, you as a business owner have a stake in wanting to make sure that talent, no matter what source it's coming from, should be easily integrated into your firm and be able to deliver the best results on the field. I'd say having Jerry Rice on your team or having Jackie Robinson on your team probably improved the results. It wasn't just a DEI initiative or check the box initiative. Those folks were trying to win. And to give the final thought on sports analogies, if you go to the NFL Combine today, no one's sitting around saying they've got a DEI program. They've got stopwatches. They've got measuring sticks of how far you can jump, how quickly you can go around the 3-cone drill, because they want the best talent. That's exactly what we're trying to do with IDAC in the asset management industry. And again, more broadly, we think American and global corporations have a role to play in looking for that mutual interest that we can then move forward to have a better result for our stakeholders.
A brilliant analogy. I love it. And I have not heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense. Let me challenge in that in just some of what I hear sometimes.
Sure.
Right. Which is, well, that all sounds good, but maybe we have a pipeline problem. Right. And even you earlier talked about, hey, we got to start in the schools, right, and whatnot. So how much of the quote unquote pipeline problem is an excuse to excuse existing discrepancies versus a legitimate issue that needs to be dealt with by IDAC or other organizations?
Joe, the pipeline issue is a necessary but insufficient condition that must be solved. There are other structural issues that, as we look at the data, there are women, minorities, people of historically underutilized backgrounds who have been involved in the financial industry since the 1960s, some of whom have broken new ground, created companies that had great value, but you don't see the participation of those individuals at the senior levels of those organizations, at the portfolio management level of those organizations, at the ownership level of building their own firms. You mentioned the 1.4% number that is the data as of last year as far as participation by assets under management in the asset management business. If you only looked at the percentage of firms that are owned by women and those that are classified as minorities, we're also including disabled persons. We're also including people with neurodiversity across the spectrum. There are a number of definitions here, but 1.4%. If you look at the number of firms owned by people in those groups, that number is about 18 to 20%. So just getting to 18 or 20% would be huge progress above 1.4. But those individuals, again, make up 70% plus of the US population. So we are so far away from that. And IDAC is simply saying, let's double the number to 3% within 5 years, which is going to be a lot of hard work. And we may have some egg on our face because we've said we're willing to be held to that standard of how we've done in helping to move the needle. But getting to 3% is nowhere close to either a medium-term goal of 18 to 20%, which would be equivalent to the number of firms, or 70% plus. But I think if you don't have a plan, it's quite likely you're not going to get there. It's like if you don't know where you're going to go, any road will take you there. We didn't want to find the right road to get us to the destination that we've settled on as a consensus within IDAC.
Absolutely. And as you recall, you and I were on the same side of that that debate, trying to get more measurable goals in there. Right. I'm glad we prevailed. Hear you. However, I hadn't realized that 18 to 20% number. So that's interesting. So it's the managers are out there. They're just not amassing as much AUM, and for non-finance people, assets under management, as other groups. Okay, so that's helpful to understand. Let me ask you too about where we are sort of in the macro setting, because and this is just my observation in venture and as a manager. In the past few years following the murder of George Floyd, there was what felt like a peak, right? An acceleration of interest from allocators, from groups that are looking to back emerging and diverse managers, and but since then, in the past, I'd say year and a half or so, it feels like a lot of that has dropped off, and some of that enthusiasm has waned. What's your perspective on kind of the overall macro trends around these themes?
Well, Joe, I've been a professional in the investment business for 35 years, so I've seen a lot of cycles, and inevitably, there is an incident that may cause attention to come to this issue. There are reasons that the economy is doing well and people are, a little more freely interested in doing things that are perceived as altruistic. Again, I don't want to hang the hat just on the altruistic thing because I think there are business reasons to do it constantly as opposed to just when times are good. But there are these cycles. And yes, there was a great deal of interest from corporations, from individuals who perhaps had not focused on DEI in the past. And that has waned as, I think the American public moves on to whatever the next shiny object is and whatever the current interest is. And of course, over the last year and a half, it's been on inflation. We've had other things going on in the political and judicial backdrop that have changed the tone. But what we've been trying to do at IDAC and what I've been trying to do personally at the firm I work for and firms prior to that is to stabilize our eye on the ball. What are we trying to accomplish? I'm a bit of a quant, so I'm a believer in having an objective function. What are you trying to solve for? So if you're trying to solve for best results, then again, I prefer using the term talent maximization over DEI because that gets the point across that this is a critical path, choke point, that if we are not all interested in finding the best talent, then we're not going to have the best results for our stakeholders. So I'm trying to get past the cycle issue, but obviously I can't ignore it. It's out there. There have been some unfortunate decisions made in the judiciary and legislative bodies over the last couple of years that have gone back to the what I'll call the worst angels in our nature, of pitting one group against another, of saying that the word identity politics is something we want to get away from, versus saying America has done best when we realize we are that amalgam, that stew, that salad, whatever you want to say, of mixing together the best of humanity from around the world that's come to these shores by various means. We were formed as a country that believed in a set of ideals, not in land and bloodlines. We formed a country that gave everyone the opportunity to aspire for excellence. And pitting these groups against one another, as I've seen more of since the time of the George Floyd murder, really takes our eye off the ball of what the objective function should be. And that's one of the things that IDAC wants to speak out about. We're apolitical, so we're not here to make a political statement. We're here to make a business statement, and hearkening to the better angels in the American culture, and we believe that that translates very well globally as we look at bringing the best talent, particularly from a gender equity perspective, throughout the world.
Understood. So the IDAC Global Summit is coming up in September 19th and 20th in Chicago.
Feels like it'll be right around the corner.
It's going to be here before you know it. Absolutely. Why should people prioritize this event, and what can folks expect?
Very simply, Joe, I would say that if there are those who understand the statement we're making about providing the best opportunity to do a good job for our clients, this is one of the critical path issues that needs to be solved. And if you really want to solve it, IDAC and the Global Summit is a great place to come to actually work on action points that we can do to move the needle. Secondly, if you're a person like me, Joe, who has been to every conference known to mankind for those 35 years that I've been in this business, all well-meaning, all great information gathered, but most of those conversations were about, let's identify the problem. Let's figure out who to blame for the problem. IDAC is about how do we fix the problem. And if you're tired of talking about it like I am after 35 years, my runway is probably less than 2 decades to go. I want to actually leave this industry and this world a better place before I'm in a rocking chair somewhere. And those who have a similar desire to actually explore actionable steps that can make it a more equitable industry that gives us better results for each of our stakeholders, they're invited to be a part of what we're talking about at IDAC. We'll get into it a little bit more, but each of those cohorts that you mentioned are responsible for recommending several action points that coming out of this Chicago convention on September 19th and 20th that we can be working on together to move that number from 1.4%. And I want to give credit to Dr. Josh Lerner at Harvard, who's worked together with the Knight Foundation. I believe there is preliminary evidence that those numbers are beginning to move, but we want to get them to at least 3% 5 years from now.
Absolutely. And Josh Lerner is also a speaker at the event.
Correct.
He's also happens to be an advisor to Bay Bridge Ventures. And so, but just to double click on your comment around action and like walking the walk versus just talking the talk. So this is the second summit.
Correct.
We had a summit last year around the same time of year in Atlanta. And one of my biggest takeaways was this isn't just a normal conference where you sit down in a seat and you just pay attention to a great speaker. It's
very intentional.
And we do have some amazing speakers,
Yes.
by the way, which we should highlight. But it's about sitting with your cohort and actually contributing towards a plan of action towards what can we actually do together. So it's more of a, like I think you said, like a convention than a conference.
Right. Isn't that exciting though? I mean,
yeah.
I love the idea of crowdsourcing ideas, having people that their experience is central to them and they would like to be able to share from their personal perspective, from the DEI journey perspective of their company, what has worked, what's not worked, what were the speed bumps that had to be overcome, and sharing that information in those cohort sessions that you mentioned. And yes, IDAC and the Global Summit is a very different kind of dynamic where you're not just listening to someone from on stage, you're participating, you're putting your ideas on the table and iron sharpening iron, saying, how can we make this better? How can we optimize a solution? Going back to my quant thoughts there. So I think that's exciting. And we feel that energy from the several hundred members of IDAC who have contributed to working groups throughout the year. You mentioned the cohorts earlier, each of the different stakeholders in our industry. Separate from that, there are several working streams, working groups that are working on pieces that are necessary but insufficient on their own to accomplish moving the needle. And very briefly, I'll cover a few of them. We don't have time to cover them all, but one of them is to talk about standards of DEI disclosure. And that working group will have recommendations in Chicago on September 20th of a common set of things that we can agree on to disclose. If we strongly believe if you don't measure something, you can't manage it. So what should we be measuring to determine are we moving the needle? So that DEI standards group, standards of DEI disclosure, they'll have recommendations. There's another group that's working on a digital resource library. You can think of it as a search engine that can provide information at your fingertips for anything you'd like to know on this topic of talent maximization, or if you choose to call it DEI, it's at your fingertips. How do you apply a DEI policy from an HR perspective within your firm? How do you apply a DEI policy as an investment policy statement if you're an allocator? How do you, as a trustee on a board that is overseeing these billions of dollars of assets that these allocators manage, how do you bring to bear a desire that the managers that work with you are chosen from the best out there and not just chosen from a small portion of the population? Those things are right now hard to find. There are wonderful things going on, from mentoring programs to great policies that have been written for an endowment, but might not be appropriate for a government pension fund, but might not be appropriate for a private wealth organization. We're trying to find ways that we can find the best practices, put them in front of people so that they can get a better result. I'm a big believer, Joe, in the concept of networking. That network theory tells me that you're better off being connected to a lot of different ideas and best practices rather than just having your blinders on and trying to create it on your own. You mentioned George Floyd. Since George Floyd's murder a couple of summers ago, I'd say 80%, 85% of the companies that I speak to have said, we want to do something, Sam, but we don't know what to do. Or we tried something and it didn't work. So this digital resource library is a way of providing great context, personal DEI journeys of companies of what they've done and what worked. Again, things that even didn't work that might be useful knowledge. So that work stream, the digital resource library, is doing a lot of great work that's extremely important. So in addition to the cohorts, there are these working groups that are pulling together information that we think is going to be extremely useful for all of our participants and stakeholders.
Yeah, very good point. And I think that's part of why IDAC, I think in particular, in terms of organizations I've been involved with historically, has so much energy and so much, it has attracted such incredible people who are on the board, who are speaking at the event, who are sponsoring the event. Can you just give us a sense of the caliber of people and organizations that are involved?
And let me start by saying, just having people of your caliber, Joe, that have been involved and have put a lot of sweat equity into building this organization, it's an honor to work with people like you. There are 13 board members from some of the most impressive firms in the country. If I begin naming some, I'll probably forget some. So, but I'll throw a few out there, and then I'll get chastised for those that I forgot. But Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, Garcia Hamilton, a number of organizations, Delta Airlines. We have foundations like the Girl Scouts of America. We have a hospital in Chicago that has a very interesting perspective on this, as well as we mentioned earlier, allocators and investment consultants. And we haven't talked yet about the industry participants who are also a hugely important part of this business. You mentioned earlier that there are a number of other organizations involved in the concept of DEI and how do we fix equitable participation in our business. So organizations like National Association of Securities Professionals, or NASP, New America Alliance, the Association of Asian American Investment Managers, and we've reached out to organizations across the spectrum. Everyone's welcome at our table. We want their participation. Mostly we want their vocal participation in letting us know what is their perspective on what equitable participation looks like.
Right. And I mean, that's one of the other, I don't want to say differentiators, but one of the aspects of IDAC that jumped out at me from the get-go, which was big tent. Everybody is welcome. If you are passionate about this mission, come on in. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come
said
from.
It better. That's right.
And we want to have a big tent. And I believe it ties to that network theory that you mentioned earlier. And just to give a few other shout outs there, sponsors include Invesco, Goldman Sachs, Carlyle, BlackRock, Crucial Partners, and a number of other large organizations. So these are the big leagues in our industry.
check our website at idac.net, and all the names will be listed up there, both from last year and this year.
And I'll call out a few other speakers that are going to be there. Dr. John Clace, CEO of Allborn. We mentioned Josh Lerner. Rod June, CIO of Lacers, is going to be there. Anyone else that you want to highlight? Sure.
Angela Miller-May will be leading off the opening reception on the 19th, the CIO of the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund. We have a number of representatives from across the spectrum of endowments and foundations, government pension funds, corporate pension funds. And again, having the academic portion of this, understanding where those structural barriers are that I referred to earlier. It's not just a pipeline issue, but how do we get past some of the things that keep talented, great individuals who've done a fantastic job at a majority-owned firm hang out their shingle, but they can't get traction quickly enough? How do we overcome some of those structural barriers? I think the academic input there, as well as the practitioner input, is extremely exciting.
And you mentioned industry partners a couple times. Can you just expand on what kinds of organizations those are? Or I guess maybe you did.
Well, I talked about it a little bit, and obviously there are many, many more. We have investment banks and brokers are in that group. We have professional organizations like the CFA Society. We've invited anyone that is interested in helping to solve this problem to be a part. IDAC goes to great lengths to try to make it clear to people that we're all in this together. And to the extent that we're saying, well, we're only interested in what's in the best interest of certain groups, whether that be women, Asians, Latinos, African Americans, white individuals, those divisive issues are keeping us from accomplishing what's best for the industry, what's best for our country, what's best for this world. Absolutely.
And we talked a bit about public-private partnerships.
Right.
We talked about the judicial system in the U.S. We should highlight that just a few weeks ago, the Supreme Court had a major ruling against affirmative action.
Right.
And as we talk about pipeline, we talk about people coming through the pipeline. That's a critical part of the pipe. So would love to, and I know you're not speaking on behalf of any organizations you're a part of, but just Sam Austin, what's your take on it?
Right. Again, I think it's a misreading of what this country's ideals are about. We know that you can't put a person on the 80-yard line in a 100-yard dash and somebody else back at the starting blocks and say, well, we're just going to blame the guy in the starting blocks because he didn't win the race. Well, if you started off 80 yards behind, we need to find out what are the structural things we can do to fix that, to make sure that there's a level playing field. It's unfortunate that what I think many considered settled law on making sure that diversity is a part of a university's culture, that's a positive thing. It's a cultural good. It's a societal good that that some elements have turned their back on that. Again, I'm not a politician, so I'm not trying to make a political statement. What I am trying to do is help America live up to its ideals, help our industry be the best that it can be. And I do think that IDAC can play a small role by helping our industry get our act together. Again, I think that the concept of public-private partnerships yields a better result, but we're not ready to have that public-private partnership until the private sector does its part. But expanding on that thought a little bit more, Joe, one thing that we think is critically important for bringing those 10,000 new professionals into our industry, again, one of the goals that we talked about at the top, is providing financial literacy education in every public school in America, in every public school around the world. That's a public good. That's a societal good. If people grow up and understand how to balance their checkbook, they understand what mortgages are, they understand how to manage their money for retirement, that's a societal good. That's not a red or blue issue. That should be something that we should all be able to get behind. But again, before we can go to the public sector, whether that be legislative bodies, judicial bodies, regulatory bodies, to ask for their help, we have to get our act together in the industry to know exactly what to ask for. How do you build the right curriculum? To my understanding, I think there are about 17 of the 50 U.S. states that currently have financial literacy programs. Which are the best ones? What are the best curriculum ideas we can pull from them? And then put together an opportunity to advocate with those government entities that this is something that is in the interest of the American people around the world in general. So that's an example of, right, I think, how we at IDAC are not just going to point out something we're complaining about with a judicial decision or decisions that have been made in other political realms, but pointing the direction toward a solution. How can we do something that's going to lift all boats?
Just for the record, I think you'd be a terrific politician.
Don't put that on me.
And I mean that in the most positive way. Well, let's rewind the tape a little bit.
Sure.
Let's pull it back to Sam Austin, the kiddo, the
sure.
child.
Yeah.
Right. You had a nice comment earlier about some of my family photos. Tell me what it was like for you growing up in Austin. Sam Austin from Austin.
Right.
I'm sure you get that a lot. But what was it like growing up in Austin, Texas? And maybe talk a little bit about how your early experiences kind of informed some of your current work.
Thanks for asking, Joe. I'm actually going to wind it back a little bit even before Austin. Please. Because first of all, at the most basic, fundamental personal level, I'm an adopted kid. So I was chosen by my parents. And that was something that was always talked about in the household. I didn't figure out what adoption meant until I think in the fourth grade library. I looked it up in the books. Oh, wow, I didn't know what that meant. But it was a very healthy environment and one where I felt wanted and chosen. But I grew up in my first few years until I was about 5 years old in a very rural setting, a small town, about 3,000 people, with the name of a famous comedian, Dangerfield, Texas. So very rural. And, I remember wearing, overalls every day and running around with my grandfather, who was kind of the person that I looked up to the most as a youngster. My father and mother were both teachers, which ties into what I do now in advising public pension funds, government pension funds, because I know what it's like to be a public servant and to work toward a retirement where you're living on a fixed income. But my father benefited from the relationships that his family had built with people throughout that small little town. So Lyndon Johnson, shows you how old I am, when he was elected president, he appointed someone from this tiny little town of Dangerfield, Texas, to be Postmaster General. Relatively minor role, but it was a cabinet role. That fellow appointed another white gentleman from this small town to run something called the Economic Development Administration, EDA, as part of the Department of Commerce. But it was about building infrastructure, education in rural white America, in urban America, on Native American reservations. And my father was picked by that gentleman to come to Austin to help him run this Economic Development Administration. And he flew all over the country working on these projects. And even today, when I'll go through Native American territory out in Arizona, I'll see some projects, water tanks and towers that he helped build. So that concept of what he was doing then is like, wow, he's trying to make things better for people. That really affected me. Okay, so I moved to Austin at 5 years old and get there just as integration is starting in the Deep South, and end up going to school where I'm one of just a very few African Americans. Most of the school was white, and almost as many individuals were Hispanic in that setting. But it taught me multiculturalism. It taught me the ability to communicate and understand other people's perspectives and how to bring people together. To bring it home, long story short, by the time I get to high school, my high school, the mascot of my high school was the Rebels. The flag that we flew was the Confederate battle flag, and the school fight song was Dixie. So this is a very different perspective than perhaps we might have in 2023. But at that time, that was just the circumstances around me. And I was always the person that everyone got along with. I made sure that people understood I was interested in their perspectives and wanted to hear what they had to say, that I had solutions and ideas that I thought were best for the organizations I was involved in. I was a joiner, so I was part of everything in the organization, including being student body president of this school that flew the rebel flag. I think that a lot of that informs where I'm at today, and some of the blood, sweat, and tears that I poured into IDAC. But right now, IDAC is an amalgamation of so many individuals like yourself, high quality organizations and professionals who have made it something far greater than I could have even conceived when we first thought of the idea 3.5, 4 years ago.
Wow. That's it's so funny how many of those threads kind of tie to where you are today. I just had to ask the side question, which is that ability you have to get along with people, to connect, to hear their ideas. The word I think of is empathy. Do you feel like empathy is one of your superpowers, or would you describe it differently?
I think empathy is my son's superpower.
Son, okay.
Yes, my son, Sam the Fourth, he has a lot of those elements we just talked about, but he has them at another level than I do. And I don't know that I'd ever really thought about it in terms of empathy, but he talks about it all the time. And it's gotten me more cognizant of what an important quality it is to be able to see things through another person's eyes, and to be able to hold several different, potentially conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time, and realize that one doesn't have to be absolutely wrong or absolutely right. Let's find the confluence of things that's going to be good for both of us.
That's what I hear when I hear you talk about talent maximization. What I hear is you putting yourself in the position of someone who maybe, isn't interested in D&I or diversity, is kind of like well, what's that? Or why does it matter? And then, but they, in their perspective, they're like, well, of course I want to maximize my talent. Right. And so I feel like I see you doing that. And I'd love to meet your son. It sounds like he does it even better. But I at least I personally think that's something that is a great strength of yours. What about just one more question around maybe a couple, but around your early career, like getting into finance? You said you've been in finance for 35 years. Right. Getting into finance, did you have any important experiences early in your career that, whether they were connected to talent maximization or race or any of these things that affected you, or generally, how was your experience in that stage of life?
Sure. I'll give one story, Joe, that I hope encapsulates it, because I could have gone 10 different directions with that question. I came to Wall Street right after the crash, so 1988, and went through a credit training program at Bank of New York at the time. Interesting time on the street when the really fine book Liar's Poker was written about that time period. Knew a lot of those guys that are mentioned in that book. A lot of the younger folks that are in that book were getting together with us down at the watering holes after work. But that experience eventually, I'm skipping a few steps here, led to me just taking on myself, Joe, to get to know movers and shakers, people that were managing directors at other firms. And I remember sitting down with this one gentleman, telling him how I enjoyed managing investments as a hobby for college friends or for family members, and telling him that I would hope one day I would be able to get into the asset management part of the business. That was one of probably, several dozen lunches that I had, just informational interviews to talk with people that I thought could give me insight on how they got to where they were in their career. I had no idea until many years later that another company, it was then called Bankers Trust Company, had an experience with an allocator where they'd gone out to visit this allocator, and the allocator and specifically a person on that board, her name was Denise Lamotte. Denise asked the people from Bankers Trust, why is there no one that looks like me that you ever send out here? And that sent Bankers Trust into a hustle to find, let's find a qualified person that we can put into this role and have them be a portfolio manager. They in turn called this guy, unbeknownst to me, called this guy I'd had lunch with and said, who do you know? And he recommended me. I had no idea about this for several years after I joined Bankers Trust, that I owed my entry into the asset management part of the business to a trustee who at that time I had never met on the other side of the country, and to a managing director at a large majority-owned firm who had just been impressed by our lunch conversation and put my name in the hat. Now, some people would call that affirmative action. I call it somebody identified a great talent and said, let's put this guy to work. So hopefully that encapsulates a little bit of how my early career went, and went on from there to do a lot of things that are similar to what we're doing with IDAC, but I think it's informative of the things that changed me and got me started, but also got me wondering how many other really incredible women are there out there? How many incredible Latinos? How many incredible Asians and African Americans, people from other countries and heritages that have latent talent, but they've not been tapped. They've not been brought into a role where they can contribute. In theory, we all want to grow GDP, right? Well, if we want to grow the GDP and there's 70% plus of the population that's been underutilized, maybe we should bring them in. Final sports analogy. There are some folks who felt like women should never play professional sports, shouldn't play soccer, let's say. They were satisfied that only men should play soccer. U.S. doesn't have a lot of World Cup championships in the men's soccer side. So it's probably a really good idea that one of those public-private partnership ideas back in the 70s was Title IX, to say, let's let women play college sports. Let's develop the kind of training programs we need to have a women's national team. And my goodness, we have 4 World Cup championships. What a concept. So I think that ties, to me at least, very much back to this story of my introduction to the asset management business 30-some years ago, that somebody said, wow, there's a talent nobody else is looking at over here. Let's bring them onto our team.
Right. And it's timely because the Women's World Cup is starting soon.
Right. Yesterday
it started.
U.S. plays tonight.
That's right. One more comment just on your personal journey or question would be, I know that this talent development piece for the youth, it's not just something you're involved with via IDAC. You're also involved via NASP and the Fast Forward program. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and why it's so important to you?
Gosh, yeah, that's my baby right there. The NASP Fast Track program, again, National Association of Securities Professionals, national organization. There are chapters around the country. I've formed the first chapter. I was the founding president of the first chapter of NASP back in the early 90s in New York City. And one of the very first things that we did, I remember this thought coming to me at 2 o'clock in the morning about, how do we reach younger students? Because at that time there were notable programs that are still going strong today, like the Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, or SEO program, the Robert and Sue Twigo Foundation, the Twigo Scholars that were at the graduate school level. And I thought, we need to go younger. We need to reach high school kids. And the Finance and Scholastic Training Track, or Fast Track program, was intended to introduce those students to some of those same folks I used to have lunches with, some of those movers and shakers. I'd invite them to come in and have them talk to the students about how did you, Ken Chenault, get to be president of American Express, and to tell them this is the type of talent and skills you have to do this person's job. Let's practice that after the person speaks and give those students a chance to practice being a bond trader, or practice having a mergers and acquisition discussion, and inspire them that they too could be a leader and someone that can help change the world, whether that's through venture capital, creating a new technology, creating bioscience improvements that can extend people's lives, that through finance, you can be involved in all of that. So that program, Fast Track, now is in, I believe, 8 different cities where the National Association of Securities Professionals operates. And along with the NASP NorCal, or Bay Area president, Antoinette Bing, I launched another Fast Track chapter here in the Bay Area last year, working with Mission High School. This year, we're looking to expand that into Oakland high schools as well as San Francisco high schools.
Wow. Brilliant. I mean, I feel like so much of career development is about exposure. And if you're not exposed, if you're just in the dark to potential career paths, it can close off a lot of doors.
Right.
And I think it helps to disrupt preconceived notions that students may have.
Right.
Right. Whereas finance, I can't go into finance because I'm not, I don't look like this, or I'm not maybe they see Boiler Room or billions, and they're like, I'm not a jerk. Or, and I had the same bias against engineers. I was
right.
like, what do engineers do? They work on a train.
Right.
What do computer scientists do? They're all like nerds and whatnot. And a lot of those preconceived notions are incorrect.
That's right.
Violently incorrect. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Well, we are just so honored to be able to work with some of those kids over the years who we've seen them blossom. This first set of kids we're working with here at the NASP NorCal Fast Track program, the 2 seniors in the program were accepted and will be matriculating in the fall at Stanford and at Cal. I know that many of the experiences they had in the Fast Track program have been formative in helping them see that anything's possible for them.
Absolutely. And I actually had the good fortune of getting to see one of the NASP Fast Forward participants in Southern California.
Yes.
A few months ago at an event that was led by Norris
Rice.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it was so inspiring to hear it, because some of them were early in their journey, and
right.
some of them had been there for a few years and were at
right.
college, and some of them had challenges at college, but the community really rallied around them and are helping them get to the next level. And you could tell it was having a huge impact. So
Norris is doing a fabulous job running the SoCal version of Fast Track. That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. Shout out to Norris.
That's right. Hey, Norris.
So let's let's move to your personal philosophy. So kind of what makes Sam Austin tick here.
Yeah.
Is there a quote or a passage or anything you think about in times of struggle or frustration?
Wow. I think all people are created equal is pretty far up there on the list for me. Back to my core beliefs in meritocracy, that there's something inspiring just about the human spirit, about the indomitable nature of a person that has a focused idea and the passion and drive and persistence to stick with that idea. That inspires me in whatever field I see it, whether it's in sciences, whether it's in entertainment, music, art, or whether you've got an idea that you believe can help make the world a better place through financial support. That the creation of capital and proper allocation of it can create a better world. Those are the things that drive me, and I want to be around other people that have that same spark of creativity. Total sidebar. I remember at some point in college, I was taking a class on the Impressionist painters back in the 1870s. It seems totally unrelated to what we're talking about in IDEC, but I remember being so impressed that these brilliant artists who were rejected by the establishment at the time, they weren't allowed to show their work in the main forums where good art was brought forward, because they had a new technique, this impressionist technique of painting. But they would gather together in salons and bars and coffee shops or over at each other's homes. And by getting together and sharing ideas, they made themselves better. It's back to that network theory idea. And I'm thinking, wow, this is just a small group of a couple of dozen people in Paris who are outcasts and considered to be not worthy of showing their work in the Louvre or the finer museums. And yet they created something that was brilliantly different. A little bit of that is in IDAC as well. That I love this idea of taking folks that perhaps are not considered to be the experts on DEI and having us share ideas and iron sharpen iron until we can find better solutions that are actionable to make the world a better place.
Absolutely. And the other kind of part of that analogy that I like is they weren't recognized at the time right away. Right. And I think that's part of it is, people coming together with contrarian ideas and creating that energy and creating the movement. And then 10 years, 20 years down the road, it seems obvious. It seems like, that was always going to happen. It's like, no.
Right. So if you think you're maybe the next Monet or Renoir or Pissarro, show up in Chicago. We'll put your work on display.
Perfect. Who is someone in your life or career that had a meaningful impact on the trajectory or changing the trajectory of a part of your life?
Wow. If you asked me that question yesterday, I would not have come up with this answer. But the person that pops into my head was someone that was there during my first year on Wall Street at Bank of New York, who insisted on excellence. And we thought, this dude is a real bore. He's, he's always, he never has a good thing to say. And he would always tell me, Sam, I think you're pushing on a string. That was one of the sayings. Or you're herding cats, and I don't think you've really thought this through. And I would have been up all night working on something, and he'd still find a flaw in it. But it drove me to do that extra bit of work to make sure that I had triple checked all my numbers, and I was a better investment professional because of that guy driving me to that extent, even though I hated it at the time. So Peter Helt, if you're still out there somewhere, that was him.
I've got a few like that too. I won't name the names, but yes, that's a good one. This is a good one. I have to ask you this one. Name one person from history that you would like to meet.
Wow. Man. That's a tough one. the scientist side of me would want to meet Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. I think the humanist side of me would want to spend some time with Martin Luther King and Gandhi. I'm a bit of a student of history, so I have about 1,000 names running through my head right now. I don't know if I could boil it down to one, but I think understanding and studying history is a little bit connected to that empathy thing of understanding these were human beings like we were that lived decades or hundreds or thousands of years ago, but they were still modern humans, and their set of wants, needs, desires weren't terribly different from ours, just we got a lot more technology than they do. But trying to understand their perspective of what they brought to the table at that time, what were the struggles they were going through, what was it that got Lincoln from the point of saying, I'll do whatever it takes to keep the Union together, to saying, we need to make sure that we understand that, all people in this country are people and should be free. How did he make that journey? So I'm really interested in that. So that doesn't really directly answer your question because I gave you about 5 or 6 different names there.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, I also have a passion for history, but it started later in life. Like when I was young, I disliked history courses, but once I found it on my own, I came to realize it was all about compelling stories and compelling bravery and excellence in very different times. And to your point around empathy, like putting yourself in that position, what it would have been like, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, same.
What do you believe that other people do not? And in other words, what is your most contrarian opinion?
Wow. Well, look, there's a large community that would agree with me, but I think most of us would be classified as science fiction nerds. When I go down this track, there's usually nothing good for me saying, but
I think I'm going to agree with you. So I think you're in good company.
I grew up as a huge fan of Star Trek, and I'm a big believer in that hopeful future. That idea of all peoples, even all species, having a common idea of working together, and that infinite diversity and infinite combinations is a good thing, despite the recent opinions of the Supreme Court. I consider that still a contrary opinion compared to most. Now, there's a bunch of other Trekkies out there that would probably say, yeah, I'm with you on that, Sam. But I think when I was a little kid, I thought that's the society that we're building towards. And I see us going the opposite direction right now. So that's one that I still strongly believe in. And no, I don't think we can travel faster than light. But that's a whole nother story. But, the concept.
Not yet.
I like the concept. Not yet. Right.
And let's hope we go down the Star Trek path instead of the Star Wars path.
right. Let's hope.
Sam, thank you so much for being here. As you can probably tell, I think the world of you. I respect you. I admire you. I've really enjoyed working with you on IDAC, and it's a joy to have you here today and be able to share a little bit about the work we've done together and of course, the work of your career. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
If people want to follow you, follow IDAC, get to this global summit in October in Chicago. How do they find it?
Go to idac.net, idac.net, and you'll find the links to the registration and the sponsorship sites for the second annual IDAC Global Summit on DEI, September 19th and 20th in Chicago. Please come and be a part of making our industry a better place, making our country and our world a better place.
Appreciate that. Let's make history.
I'm with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Appreciate it.
You bet.